Well, hello, America, and welcome to the Glenn Beck program and The Blaze. This is the network that you are building. I'm thrilled to tell you that we are on a new course. I feel like we have spent the last 2 years building a foundation of something, and beginning next week, you're going to begin to see the fruits of that foundation. It's taken us longer than I care, but everything has to be done just right, and we have to take our time. We have one shot of building something that can empower you and help you change the world. Tonight, we're going to take, we're going to continue the turn that we made really when I got back from vacation. I had told my staff before I left for vacation that we are coming back, and we are not, I'm not going to be the guy who talks about that guy who I'm not going to name anymore. I can't do it anymore. The problem is bigger than him, and we have to fix ourselves, and we have to move forward and build, and not be caught in a trap of just playing defense all the time. We've had to catch up on a few things that have happened while we were gone. We did that a couple of days ago. The biggest story, of course, when I went on vacation were the events in Newtown, Connecticut. Last night we had Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman in and spent some time talking about the problems that nobody is willing to talk about. There are isolated and troubled people. And we are building a society now where your Facebook friends are your friends. No, they're not. Your Twitter followers are not really following. What you say in cyberspace isn't even real anymore. And with IBM announcing over the last few weeks that computers in 5 years will have all 5 senses, with Ray Kurzweil telling me in the last month, the guy who has just now been appointed the head of the artificial intelligence division of Google. Believe me, it's not a search engine. That's not what they're doing. That's collecting data. They are developing artificial intelligence. Things will become less and less real to more and more people. We're headed for a vastly different world where politics is the least of our problem. And we're seeing the results of this brave new world, the loss of 26 innocent lives at a school, 20 of them young children, shakes the community, shakes the country all the way from coast to coast, and the anger and the grief-stricken in its wake. It's been 3 weeks since that day. In that time, memorial services have been held for the victims. Sandy Hook has been moved to a new building. The children have returned to class as the community and those families whose lives were forever changed attempt to pick up the pieces and carry on. My family was personally affected. For many people in Newtown and beyond, this was a cold and hollow Christmas. It was a Christmas, at least for me, where I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I'm beginning to really understand good and evil. Celebrating faith is what we were supposed to do. Find comfort in faith. How can you find it after such an unspeakable tragedy? That's what faith is really all about. The healing process is only the beginning, and some amazing things have happened. Does anybody remember the shooting with the Amish? And when the Amish went and comforted the family? I said after that tragedy, that is what we should all strive for. Well, it happened again. Robbie Parker, whose daughter Emily was killed, reached out to the family of the gunman to offer support the first day. He said, quote, "I can't imagine how hard this experience must be for you And I want you to know that our family and our love and our support goes out to you as well. Love and compassion in the face of inconceivable personal pain, despair, and evil is what faith is all about. Faith is knowing that you are not alone, even in the grip of the most awful, heartbreaking circumstances, reaching out past yourself and letting someone else know that they are not alone. Love and grace. A remarkably selfless gesture from a man and from a family who could have been expected, was expected, would be accepted to be a family just overwhelmed by their own pain and angry. And it was the first and most important step in the healing process. There is a book that has been out now for a few years, written by a remarkable man. It is a remarkable story. It's about a father whose child disappears and her bloody clothes are found in a shack. The name of the book is The Shack. You, I'm sure, know about it. You've at least seen this cover everywhere you've ever gone, because everybody I know has it, has read it. It's everywhere. The father in the story is called back to the shack years later, where he has to work through his grief and anger in order to heal. Faith in the face of pain, grace to spread the message. The most amazing thing I think about this book is that the message was never intended to be published. It was originally written just for the author's children and his close friends. Only 15 copies were originally printed at an Office Depot. But the concept was too important not to be shared, and now, 18 million copies later, the message of finding faith through pain is still being shared. I want to introduce you to the author, William Paul Young. He's called himself an accidental author because the way he got his first book published, providential is probably more accurate. Certainly best-selling author would fit. And he has a new book out, which also deals with the absolute importance of faith in difficult situations. It is called Crossroads. Paul, how are you?
Good to be with you.
I remember the first time I met you, you just appeared on my set in New York at the Blaze when we had just gone on. And I'm like, you're not like the Shack guy, are you?
Yeah.
You are an amazing man because let's go back to, what was it, 2004? You were a janitor, were you not?
Yeah. I actually had 3 jobs through until February of 2008. I was working 3 jobs, and one of them was shipping and receiving and cleaning toilets and sweeping floors. Yeah.
2008.
Yeah, February of 2008.
Okay. Now, let me go back. Your life, 18 million books later.
Yeah, which makes no sense. I mean, I don't even understand 100, let alone 18 million.
Okay, 18 million. Yeah. You're not cleaning toilets unless you're
No.
by
well,
choice.
at home.
Yeah. Okay.
Some things never change, you know, hopefully.
Let me get into your story personally first, because I think it's the common thread between us and so many people that when you're down and out, there's only 2 ways to go: out or up.
You know, and you either want to run in one sense or another, and suicide is kind of the ultimate running away. And for some of us, coming out of damaged histories, it's easier to think about that as an opportunity rather than trying to actually trust someone.
He thought he was black until you were 6.
Yeah.
He thought he was black.
Missionary kid, you know. I grew up in a culture, I didn't consciously understand that I was not until I went to boarding school when I was 6, and it was a huge disappointment.
Well, how do you mean?
Well, because this was my family. I was 10 months old when we went into the highlands of New Guinea, and almost 10 years old when we came back to Canada. And that's my world. Donnie was the first dreaming language, right? I was around a family, a community of people who cared about me in the sense that my parents were too busy to. You know, this is back in the 1950s and 60s. This is when in missions there was a sense that if you did the work of God, God would take care of the kids. And there was just so much ignorance about, you know, culture and about what they were facing, and plus their plates were full. And they were part of a generation that didn't even know they had baggage. Wouldn't have known what to do with it if they'd have known.
You also, I mean, that was not your real trouble in your life as a kid.
No, I have significant great sadnesses, and like everybody does. And this is, I think, one of the reasons the shack has so resonated, because it gave people not only a language to have a conversation about God that wasn't religious, but it gave them permission to say, my great sadnesses actually matter. This is where I come from. And so, you know, I've got probably 3 major great sadnesses. Very difficult relationship with my father. You know, he's a man who comes from his own damaged history. And, you know, he and his brothers and sisters, he's one of 12. And when he was even not quite a teenager, they were orphaned, picked up by children's services, shipped all over the U.S. and Canada, basically as farm labor. You know, they lived in the barns, worked the fields during the day, lived in the barns watching the families through the windows. He's an angry young man. And, you know, Jesus saves him out of the logging camps, basically. He goes to Bible school and then to the mission field. He's angry. And sometimes religion just teaches you how to hide your stuff better. And so his anger really came out behind closed doors. Well, I knew as a child I didn't want anything to do with this man. I mean, he communicated to me regularly that I didn't belong to him. And because he didn't know how. He did not know how to be a father. And it's not just that he wasn't willing to be, he didn't have the ability at that time. And so there's this big, huge issue over the years between me and my dad. And we've come a long way, and we've got a long ways to go. But it's a great sadness. Relationship with my dad, and then sexual abuse. Not inside my nuclear family, but inside the tribal community. Began somewhere a little before 5 years old. And it was a lot. And the first night at boarding school, the big boys came and molested the little boys. So sexual abuse becomes something that absolutely rips apart the fabric of the human soul. There is nothing that damages like sexual abuse. It just destroys the boundaries. And what do children do? They don't comprehend it. They don't understand it. It's absolutely confusing. So they survive. They find a way to survive. And everything becomes about safety. That's the metaphor behind the shack. You know, it's the house on the inside that people help you build. And a lot of us, we didn't get very good help.
Okay, so tell me your turning point.
Turning points. You know, there's a lot of turning points in our lives. You can look back and say, this person at this point saved me, or this person at this point. You know, marrying Kim, there is no question that that was a turning point. She saved my life, there's no question. But as far as dealing with, you know, this place on the inside that I never wanted anybody to ever find, you know, the house on the inside, the shack. Because as a religious kid, what you do, a lot of us, I think, is we build a facade outside the shack, you know, a piece of plywood we can paint as fast as we can pick up people's expectations. And we're hoping maybe if we can just perform well enough, someday we'll become a real boy, you know. And at some point, that facade has got to come down, which only leaves the place of shame and pain and the lies and, you know, all the hiding. Because in the shack is where you store all of your addictions and you hide all your secrets. And you don't want anybody in there.
And you're afraid that there's nothing but that in there.
See, and that's the damage of lies and secrets. Secrets absolutely trap us. Why do we keep them? We keep them because we're terrified. We're terrified that if anybody finds out about what's in there, we will lose the little bits of affection and grace and love and kindness that people have shown us that we've worked so hard for. And yet when somebody comes to us with the very things that can heal our hearts.
Hang on just a sec before you do that. But I think that's right to a point.
Oh.
When I first said I either have to surrender or give up, when I when I got up, I surrendered to who I was, and I trusted in God, and I was not going to hide, and I just said who I was. I just said who I was, and said all my faults and everything else.
Yeah.
And it was very freeing, but it left me very alone at first. But I was lucky enough to realize, oh my gosh, my friends are just as wounded as I. The wounded gather together.
Yeah.
And when somebody starts to say, I'm not going to live this way anymore, most of them go away because they're too afraid. And so you do find yourself alone because only your abusers or your wounded are around you. And then you find good friends, good people, decent people who love you, faults and all.
Sure. You know, but at the same time, there has to be a process in which you give up the very things that kept you safe. And that's a hard journey. You know, the journey is one of trust. Like you said, you trusted God. Well, it took me 50 years. You know, because trust is the issue, right? Religion told me it was trying to please God, which has really got nothing to do with God at all. It doesn't even matter who your God is, as long as you know whatever the rules are and the things you have to do to please God, right? And those of us who are broken on the inside, we can't compete, right? We don't have what it takes on the inside to compete in an environment where we have to live this perfectionist, holy life. We don't have it. And so we learn how to fake it. And then you find out it's not about pleasing God at all. It's about learning to trust God. See, now it becomes, okay, so who is this God? Because you can't trust someone you don't know loves you. I mean, you can say you do, and religion will teach you how to use the language of trust without actually having to do it. But trusting, I mean, taking the risk.
It's the hardest, most insane thing you'll ever do.
Absolutely. And it's the only thing that'll heal your heart, too.
It is. I've never jumped out of an airplane. I don't remember which astronaut said it, but I believe it to be true. There is no reason to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. But it is like one of the things that I was like, no, there's no way I'm going to jump out of an airplane. I would jump out of an airplane every day and think it was easier than trusting some of the insane decisions that come to you from God, because you are so different than God's mind. When He tells you to do something, you're like, that won't work. No, you don't understand.
Yeah.
And it's usually, the trust comes usually in everything that you do not want to do.
Oftentimes, and it's because it's tampering with the things that have kept us safe. You know, the very skill sets that children have that keep them alive eventually become the things that keep them hidden from relationships. And relationships is where our damage occurs. But relationships is where our healing is going to occur as well. It's just, you can't get around it. As much as we would like to think that we're going to get healed without anybody else finding out about it, not going to happen. You know, you asked what my turning point was. You know, Mackenzie in the shack spends a weekend in the shack. That weekend represents 11 years for me. That 11 years of the renovation of the heart, where everything came down, started January 4th, 94, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it ended at the end of 2011. And where the major reconstruction of my heart, and it began with the facade coming down, and that began with a phone call.
What was the phone call?
Kim, she calls me. And I'm 38 years old. We have, our 6th child has been born. We have 6 kids who are now 19 to 32. And they're the ones that I wrote the shack for at the encouragement of Kim. And, but Kim calls me on this afternoon, and this is what she says. One sentence. I'm waiting for you at your office, and I know.
Back in a minute. So the phone call comes in.
Yep.
Your wife says,
I'm on the other side of town. She says, I'm waiting for you at your office, and I know.
Hang on just a second. How many people have heard me say, anybody who has a true pivot point in their life can tell you what the color of the walls were when they realized and what time it was. They know exactly when it happened. This is a man who understands a pivot point. This is a man whose life really changed, because you know, and you never ever forget.
Yep. I'm at Vietnamese food. I'm with Steven Anderson. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I get the call. I step outside. And the facade comes down. Because what Kim knows is that I'm in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. In fact, when she started to feel a separation between me and her, she went to this person for counsel. So the betrayal was monumental. And suddenly, there is nothing to hide behind. You know, I never had let Kim inside my shack. I didn't let this other woman in there either. But, you know, what happens, I think, in some affairs is that suddenly you begin to distort reality, because you think, maybe I have found somebody who will love me for who I really am. But you don't tell them either, right? If I had really loved this person, there's no way I would have done so much damage to both her, her family, her relationship with her husband, and she wouldn't have to me either. You know, infatuation is actually based on not knowing someone. The more you get to know someone, the more the possibility of real love is there, and the less of this infatuation. But in that moment, I had to make a decision. Because when the facade comes down, all you've got left is your shame. That's all you got. So what are you going to do? I had to decide whether to face Kim or kill myself. And suicide had been a friend for years. I mean, you have to understand, it had always been the final running away. I'd been to 13 schools before I graduated high school. I know how to leave. You know, of course, I'm a Christian, so I don't run away from relationships. I just hear God call me somewhere else. And so here I am, you know, what am I going to do? I still, to this day, cannot tell you how I got from one side of town and drove into my driveway at the office that I ran. Kim had already, now Kim, you have to understand, she and her 5 sisters are called the Force, right? These are Minnesota, North Dakota folks. Salt of the earth. They're genetically enhanced to all talk loudly at the same time and understand each other. You know, I'm from a religious family. We hide everything. We lie about most stuff. And, you know, you have to have an order of service when you get together. And Kim had already torn up my office. She had no clue that a human being could be more than one thing. She didn't understand that. And me, I'd been a different thing in every situation, because, you know, when you learn that everything on the inside is dead, you learn to live from the outside in. So it's like, what do you want me to be, this group of people, right? You just tell me, what do you need me to be? I can do that. And this group of people is something else? Just tell me what that is. I can do that too, right? And so you end up being different things in different situations, and then you got to try to keep the lies going in order to try to keep the stories balanced out. And it's this exhausting daily survival. At the same time as in the shack, all your addictions still keep going, as much as you try to push them down.
That's why you move an awful lot, because it starts to unravel and you can start all over again.
Yeah. And one of the things about shame, you know, because you're living in an ocean of shame that is covered over by a thin layer of perfectionist performance, right? So anybody comes by and they go, you know what, you're not everything that you say you are. Boom, up comes the shame, and you either fight or run, fight or flight, right? And you hear God call you somewhere else, you know, because you start over, you want to start over.
Okay, so before we get into this, because this is it's a similar story, but a very different story.
Very different story.
And before we get into this, let me just ask you this question, because you get a lot of heat from people who are religious and say, The Shack was not a good religious book, blah, 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 blah.
It's not a good religious book. It's not. I mean, it's not about, here are the principles, and so if you do these right things, then you'll.
Okay, let me restate it, because I had the same thing said about a book that I wrote, The Seven, and The Christmas Sweater, which is clearly about the atonement. And what they'll say is that you are a new ager.
Oh, yeah.
And hang on just a sec.
Okay.
You've said 3 times now, I think, in the last 20 minutes, something that was derogatory about your family, but you say, I come from a religious family, so we lied. Well, I came from a non-religious family, and we lied.
Yeah.
And I'm in a very religious family now. My nuclear family we're very religious, and we don't lie. So,
Okay, we have to
help me out.
understand the difference between religion as performance and religion as tradition or heritage, right? Huge
Yeah.
difference.
Yes.
And there is a pejorative sense in religion.
It's like going to Rome.
Yeah.
You go to Rome, and you're like, there's a church right down the street you
Yeah.
can go to.
And not only that, but you're overwhelmed with the sense of beauty and the sense of art and the transcendence that is even in the monuments and the structures inside of a religious tradition. Okay, so when I'm talking religion in a pejorative sense, I'm talking a system in which you're here, God's somewhere out there, and you have to do all these things to win the approval of that God. What we're talking about is we're here, we're lost, we don't know who we are, we're broken, God knows, so he comes looking for us. That's the difference.
The lost sheep.
Lost sheep, lost coin, lost son, right? And if that's religion, I'm in. If we're talking about that. My struggle has been partly is that we create institutions and baptize them as if they're holy when they're temporal, right? People are holy and eternal. Systems are temporal. And systems always are an expression of both the good in us and the damage in us. And they have the ability to help us corporately do amazing things, and they have the ability to absolutely create destruction.
My faith says, do not believe in the people. Do not put your trust in the people. Put your trust in God, because people are flawed. And they're going to disappoint you. And how many people even go to churches on little things and they're like, well, she said something about me and I don't, and then they go to church and all of a sudden they got a grudge against God or church or something like that.
Yeah.
Stop. Put your faith in God and know that it's a vehicle to get you closer to God.
Well, the beautiful thing about church is that it's a group of broken people who are getting together to express their brokenness.
It's a hospital.
In many respects it is. And
it's a hospital.
Yeah. And
it's a spiritual hospital.
I love the church. I struggle against some of the institutional structures.
I will tell you that I used to be where you were, and I am probably in one of the most rigid religions, perceived rigid religions there is. Works for me. But I, like you, I needed God, and then because I'm such a flawed individual, if I don't have framework around me, I'm doomed. If I don't have God's structure to hold me in, I don't know how people can go, oh, I live on a mountaintop and I'm Gandhi and I'm good. And I can't do that. I'm not Mother Teresa. I have to have that structure. If you don't, God bless you. God bless you. But
we all need a cast as long as our arm is broken, right?
Yeah. I think unfortunately, I have a feeling my arms are broken for the rest of my life. We'll be back in just a second. All right. So I swear to you, we're going to get to the new book. Finish up the story about your moment.
Well, it's about Kim, right? So I make it across town. I walk into the office, which Kim has destroyed, physically destroyed. And she lights into me with every piece of fury she has, rightfully so. And a few hours into this, I said to her, Kim, if we're going to do this, I have to tell you every secret I have.
That must have terrified her.
She was too naive to understand at the moment. It terrified me. And naively, she said, bring it on. And it took me 4 days. 4 10-hour days to tell my wife all my secrets. and it destroyed her. At the end of that 4 days, she said to me, I will never believe another word that comes out of your mouth the rest of your life.
Oh my gosh.
And I believed her. And I'd really hit the bottom. And you know you've hit bottom when you stop pointing your finger anywhere else. And yes, there's abuse in my history. Yes, all that. But I owned this. I owned this decision.
Mm-hmm.
This was mine. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, if I'd have said, you know, some of this is your stuff, I'd have been gone in an instant, right? But it didn't even cross my mind. I was done. And I looked in the yellow pages, and I started with the A's, and I found Agape Youth and Family Services that specialized in childhood sexual abuse. And I called them up and made an appointment. And I walked in and sat in front of a man, first Byron Keeler, who pointed and he said, I think I got the guy for you. And I met Scott Mitchell, who became my counselor and became my friend. And
This is what year?
this is 2004.
2004.
Yeah. Excuse me, 1994.
1994,
94, beginning of 94, January, right? To the end of 2004. So 94. So I'm sitting in front of Scott, and I said, my life is over. For the first time in my life, I said these words to another human being. Can you help me? Can you help me? And Scott, he says, yeah, I can help you, but it's going to take 1.5 years. I said, I'm in. He said, everybody, where they're sitting where you are, everybody's in. A couple months from now, you'll feel more in control and you'll feel better about yourself and you'll quit. You'll bail out right before the really hard stuff. And I said, Scott, you don't understand. If I can't find healing, I'm done. What am I going to do, right? I don't even trust myself anymore to know if I'm done. So I'm not leaving until you tell me I'm done. I mean, that's how bottomed out I was. And we started working, and 9 months later, he said, you're done. As far as this piece, he said, we've never had anybody work this hard and stick with it. And he knew it was because it was life or death for me. What am I supposed to do? Go back?
Do you feel ever, because I do, I said this to my bishop. He's such a sweet man. And I said to him the other day, I actually feel sorry for people like you who have not gone through the process where you truly needed the atonement, where you needed, are so broken, there's nothing left. I can't relate to people, and we had a nice conversation. I said, I don't mean to offend you here. And he's like, I need it too, brother. But I can't relate to people who aren't so broken that they have nothing left, where that's where for me, that's where it came from. My loyalty and my faith in God comes from, he was the only one there. He's the only one there.
Yeah, I know that. You know, and I understand what you're saying, but here's the flip side to it. I don't believe you have to go to hell and back to come to some kind of spiritual
I'm not recommending
maturity.
it. I'm not working for the tourism bureau of hell.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
And not only that, I've got 6 kids who didn't start with near the baggage that I did. I didn't start at 0, right? I started minus something. And it took me 50 years to get to 0, right? My kids, they hear faster, they hear clearer, they make their decisions quicker because they don't have all the stuff that they have to work through. The world gives you baggage anyway. We live in a world that's broken, and we're going to get some sadness along the way. But they're way ahead of where I was at their age, and I am grateful every day, right? So I do totally get what you're saying, but the flip side is I am so grateful when it doesn't have to be that way.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I know, because I think there are a lot of people that are just, they never get out. They never crawl out of that abyss. They never crawl out of that abyss. It's hard.
Yep.
Because your counselor said, every stone has to be unturned.
Yeah.
If you're going to survive, you cannot have any point of darkness.
Did you have a point? I got halfway through that 9 months, and he had said it's going to get really hard. I had no idea how hard it was going to get, because I got to this place where I literally, Kim was pounding on me every day. I mean, she's going, how can a human being do this to another human being? You know, how could you do this to your family and to your kids? And she is, you know, part of what saved me was the fury of this woman, right? I'm serious. That's part, I understand elements of the wrath of God, you know. So she's pounding on me, and I get to this cliff, and it's like she spins me around and says, look at it. And I'm looking down. And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to do? Go back to before I'm 5 years old and see if anything's real? And I lost all my hope in that moment. I mean, I literally, it all calmed down, and I began planning a trip to Mexico because I didn't want my kids to find my body. I mean, it was that clear cut. And God showed up in 2 friends who had no clue where I was at the time. One went to Kim and said, you need to back off a little bit because I think you're going to kill him. That's the words he uses. And she pulled back. And the other friend came to me and said, where are you? And I described standing on this cliff. And I'm going, how do I know? How do I know I'm not going to do the same thing? How do I know I'm not going to just keep causing damage, you know? I'm not going to just keep hurting everybody in my world. How do I know? I said, you know what? All I am is I'm standing on this cliff, and I'm a little pile of dried up crap. It's not the word I used. And I'm terrified. I said, the wind is blowing, and it's going to blow it all away. There's not going to be anything left. And she says, there is a seed. A seed. I'm thinking, a seed? And then I think, you know what? If there is just a seed, something can grow. I don't know what it is, but something could grow. And then I think, you know, seeds, they grow good in this kind of stuff.
I have to give you my book, The Christmas Sweater. I want you just to read the dream sequence. Okay. Because I found myself in a dream at my darkest point, and I was standing in a cornfield completely just gray and dead, everything dead. And it was me. And I believe I had a divine dream. I believe I was visited in my dreams by the Lord. And he showed me the same thing, a seed. He showed, it's green, it's green. I think everybody gets to that point to where you think, I'm dead inside, there's nothing left, I cannot do anything else, and that's where faith kicks in. Back in a minute. I don't think I have, I'm trying to remember, I don't think I have felt this question this hard, except for perhaps David Barton. Do you know David Barton by chance?
I don't.
Will you come back and spend more time with me?
Yeah, I would love to do that.
I don't ever pass by the person who cleans the office, because in 2008 it might have been a guy full of wisdom like this. It is. Let me ask you this. I'm at a place in my life now where I think I'm about to have another, you know, you come in phases. You know, you come and you think you're done, and you're like, okay, and then it like slams you, and you're like, you gotta be kidding me, there's another level here? And then you go, and then it slams you, and it always gets bigger and better and brighter each day.
Yeah.
I am at this point right now in my life where I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. What else do you want? What else is there? What else? Really? There's another level you want me to dig down? And I don't know what it is yet. I just feel this rumbling. Do you know where
I get what you're saying. Where I'm at is finally, it only took me 50 years to become a child. I'm not going back to being an adult. It's way too much work. I like this being a child, because I wasn't one when I was little, right? I was trying to deal with adult kinds of things. It means that you you're comfortable living inside the grace of just one day, and you realize everything else is just sheer imagination, right? It's all smoke and mirrors, right? It's sheer imagination. I don't know if I'll be here by tomorrow. Why do I want to spend today's grace that empowers me to sense His affection and hear His voice and sense the embrace? Why would I want to spend it on things that don't exist? And we do all the time. I spent most of my life, I call it future tripping. We have these imaginations that scare the crap out of us because God's not in them. Even in our imaginations of them, God's not in them. Right? And so they're just this stuff, and we drag the things we're afraid of into the present, and then we try to control the relationships around us in our lives to keep those things that are imaginations from actually happening. It's ludicrous, but it's because we don't trust. Children, they're not thinking about future tripping. They're not thinking about, what if I get my pink slip, or what if this person says this, and then I'll say this, and then there goes that relationship, and then I'll screw that up, and then I'll mess this thing up. And they're not thinking about stuff. They're thinking about, wow, let's do that again, right? And they are inside the grace of a day until their trust gets violated and they have to draw upon their own ability to control the world around them to stay safe. And I love being inside the grace of a day. Nothing else makes any sense to me.
I think I agree with you, but but you also have to care for what is coming tomorrow. You have to plan.
I've got a schedule. It says I'm going to be here and there and whatever.
Right, okay.
But it's held very loosely. You know, what did Jesus say? Take no thought for tomorrow. Every day's got problems of its own. You have grace that is sufficient for the day, right? And how about take captive every empty imagination that raises itself up against the knowing of God? Part of the ludicrous of what we do is that we think we know what God's purposes are. You know what I've heard?
This is where I think, remember I was saying, you know, those guys like Gandhi and Mother Teresa go to the mountaintop and they could just, I don't think I can do that.
Well,
I don't think I can let go that much to where I'm like, whatever.
It's a process. See, it's just like looking at this world. You can get overwhelmed by how dark it is, or you can look at the throne, see the same guy's on it, and he's not wringing his hands.
Yeah, I know that.
I'm good, right?
I know that.
And I can trust that. I think
it's the only thing I do trust.
Well, see, and that's the beauty of it. And because you can trust that person, you can rest inside the wisdom that that person has. The child can stay inside the grace of the day because he knows he's got a parent who is for him, loves him or her, and is all about him or her.
Okay. This is the strangest interview I've ever done because we did not talk about this book at all. And that's his publicist is somewhere backstage going, what the hell are you guys talking about? Mention the book. It's fantastic. It is the same message of hope, but it is a vastly different story.
Yeah.
And I'd love to
Much more community story.
Yeah. Hopefully he will come back. Crossroads is the name of the book, available everywhere. Paul, thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you.
God bless you.
Bless you too.
Back in a minute. We were getting ready to leave, and I was going to leave you with another message, and Paul started to say something to the audience, and I said, wait. Say that to all of the audience.
First is that the first 15 copies of The Shack that I made at Office Depot did everything I ever wanted that book to do. To me, this has been such a God thing, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of it, and if it all disappeared tomorrow, I'd be absolutely fine. Because the second thing is, everything that matters to me was in place before I wrote it. It has an added identity or worth or value or significance or purpose or security or meaning or love to me.
Relationship good?
Relationship is good. Kim and I are the best we've ever been.
From Dallas, good night, America.